Nadine agreed to a cold marriage contract to save her family's land. Lucien married her to keep his inheritance. But when a veil lifts, everything begins to unravel. Is it love, or just a performance they can't escape? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun peeked through the lace curtains of the old Clark family home in Savannah. Nadine Clark stood motionless as her grandmother, Eleanor, adjusted the wedding dress around her slender frame. "You're doing the right thing, child," Eleanor said, her weathered hands smoothing the fabric. "This marriage will save our land. The bank won't wait another month." Nadine's eyes fixed on her reflection. At 26, she had the kind of beauty that turned heads, deep brown eyes that held both wisdom and sadness, high cheekbones, and skin the color of rich honey. But that beauty had brought her little joy. In this town, in this world, she had learned early that her worth was always questioned, always measured against lighter standards. "I know, Grandma," she said softly. "The contract is clear. Mr. Albrecht gets his inheritance by fulfilling his father's wish for marriage. We get enough money to save our land. Nobody expects love." Eleanor's eyes welled with tears. "I never wanted it to come to this. Your grandfather and I, we married for love." "Times change," Nadine replied, reaching for the veil on the bed. "Besides, it's just paper, a business arrangement." As she placed the veil over her face, Nadine felt a strange relief. Behind it, she could hide. Behind it, nobody could judge her. "The car is here," called Nadine's cousin Tanya from downstairs. Eleanor squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "Remember who you are, Nadine. Clark women bend, but we don't break." Across town, in the luxurious hotel suite rented for the occasion, Lucien Albrecht stared out the window with cold eyes. At 31, he had built an empire in tech investments, doubling the fortune his father had left. But that same father had left one final demand: marriage to a bride of his choosing or lose everything. "This is ridiculous," Lucien muttered, adjusting his tie for the third time. An arranged marriage in this century. His best friend Marcus lounged on the sofa. "You've only got to stay married a year. That's what the lawyers said, right? Then you can divorce her and keep everything." "I haven't even seen her," Lucien said through gritted teeth. "Father's lawyer just said she comes from an old Savannah family fallen on hard times, probably some desperate, plain woman who couldn't find a husband otherwise." Marcus stood and handed Lucien his jacket. "Look, you survived your father's emotional games for 30 years. What's one more? Sign the papers, say the words, and in a year you're free." Lucien's jaw tightened. "Have the prenup ready. I want her signature before the ceremony." The small chapel was filled with white roses and soft music. Only a handful of guests occupied the pews, Eleanor and a few Clark relatives on one side, some business associates of Lucien's on the other. No friends, no celebration, just witnesses to a contract. Nadine stood at the back, veil covering her face completely. Through the delicate fabric, she could make out the tall figure at the altar. Lucien Albrecht, her future husband, a stranger. "Ready?" asked the wedding planner, a woman hired by Lucien's lawyer. Nadine nodded, clutching her small bouquet tighter. The music changed, signaling her entrance. With each step down the aisle, she felt the weight of generations of Clark women who had sacrificed for family. At the altar, Lucien didn't turn to watch her approach. His back remained stiff, his posture unwelcoming. Only when she stood beside him did he glance down, his blue eyes barely acknowledging her presence. "Before we proceed," he whispered coldly, "there's a document to sign." From his pocket, he withdrew folded papers. The prenuptial agreement. Nadine had been warned it was coming. Without a word, she took the pen offered by Marcus and signed her name. The ceremony was brief, mechanical. The pastor's words about love and cherishing fell flat in the frigid atmosphere. When Lucien slid the ring onto Nadine's finger, his touch was as impersonal as a business handshake. "You may kiss the bride," the pastor finally announced. For the first time, Lucien turned fully toward Nadine. With obvious reluctance, he lifted the veil. The world stopped. Lucien's breath caught in his throat. His eyes widened as they met Nadine's. He had expected, what, someone plain, desperate? Beneath him, the woman before him was breathtaking. But it wasn't just her beauty that struck him. It was the quiet dignity in her eyes, the subtle defiance in her posture. This was no desperate woman. This was someone with pride and depth. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, confusion, maybe even the beginning of desire. Nadine saw it all. The shock, the reassessment, the sudden interest where seconds before there had been only disdain. Her heart hardened. Their lips met in the briefest of kisses, cold, formal, yet something electric passed between them, something neither wanted to acknowledge. The reception was held at the Clark family home, a once grand house now showing signs of financial strain. Nadine had changed from her wedding gown into a simple cream dress, the veil discarded. She moved among the guests like a ghost, accepting congratulations with quiet grace. Across the room, Lucian nursed a whiskey, his eyes following his new wife. He couldn't reconcile the woman before him with the image he'd constructed. "So," Marcus said, approaching with a smirk, "not what you expected, huh?" Lucian frowned. "It changes nothing. It's still just a contract, if you say so," Marcus laughed. "Though most men would consider themselves lucky to be trapped with that for a year." "That," Lucian said sharply, "is my wife you're referring to." Marcus raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. Later, as the small gathering wound down, Lucian found Nadine on the porch, staring out at the ancient oak trees that lined the property. "Our flight leaves in 2 hours," he said. "The car will be here soon." Nadine nodded without turning. "I've packed what I need." "About today," Lucian began, suddenly uncomfortable. "I hope you understand this arrangement is just business," Nadine finished for him, finally meeting his gaze. "You don't need to explain. I saw your face before you lifted the veil, Mr. Albrecht. You thought you were getting someone beneath you, someone you could tolerate for a year and then discard." Her directness surprised him. "And now?" he asked, something challenging in his voice. "And now you're surprised, maybe even pleased with your purchase." Her voice was soft, but had a steel edge. "But remember this moment. Remember how you felt before you saw my face. That's who you are. Don't come near me now, just because I surprise you." She walked past him back into the house, leaving Lucian speechless on the porch. The flight to Boston, where Lucian lived, was silent. Nadine stared out the window of the private jet, while Lucian buried himself in work on his laptop. Two strangers, bound by signatures and rings. Lucian's home was a modern penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, sleek, minimalist and cold, much like its owner. "Your room is this way," Lucian said, leading Nadine down a hallway. "I had the guest suite prepared for you." The meaning was clear. Separate rooms, separate lives. "Thank you," Nadine said simply. "I have meetings tomorrow, but Mrs. Hayes, the housekeeper, will help you with anything you need." He hesitated at the door. "The contract requires us to attend certain social functions together, but otherwise your time is your own." "And what exactly am I supposed to do with that time, Mr. Albrecht?" Nadine asked. For a moment, Lucian looked startled, as if he hadn't considered this. "Whatever you want. Shop, travel. The monthly allowance specified in the agreement should cover any activities." "I'm not interested in shopping," Nadine replied. "I was a teacher before this. Perhaps I could look for work here." "A teacher?" Lucian seemed surprised again. "That won't be necessary. As my wife, even temporarily, certain appearances—" "I won't sit idle for a year, Mr. Albrecht," Nadine interrupted. "I'm not a doll to be placed on a shelf and admired when convenient." Their eyes locked in silent challenge. Finally, Lucian nodded. "As you wish. Good night, Mrs. Albrecht." After he left, Nadine sat on the edge of the bed, finally alone. Only then did she allow the tears to fall. Not for the marriage. She had never expected love, but for the life she'd left behind. The classroom full of children who gave her purpose, the grandmother who raised her after her parents died, the home that held her family's history, all traded for a contract with a man who couldn't even look at her until he'd seen her face. Weeks passed. Lucian and Nadine settled into a careful routine of avoidance. He left early for work, returned late. She explored Boston, visited libraries and museums, and began volunteering at a community center teaching adult literacy 3 afternoons a week. They spoke only when necessary, took meals separately, and maintained the fiction of their marriage only in public, until the night of the Hunter Foundation Gala. "We need to attend together," Lucian explained over a rare shared breakfast. "James Hunter is an important business connection." Nadine nodded. "I'll be ready." When she emerged from her room that evening, Lucian was waiting in the living room. He turned as she entered, and for the second time since they met, he looked genuinely startled. Nadine wore a simple blue gown that highlighted her graceful figure. Her hair was swept up, revealing the elegant line of her neck. She wore no jewelry except her wedding ring. "You look," Lucian began, then cleared his throat. "The car is waiting." The gala was held at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, its grand hall transformed with lights and flowers. As they entered, Lucien placed his hand at the small of Nadine's back, the first time he had touched her since their wedding. "Lucien!" called a silver-haired man, approaching with a champagne flute in hand. "And this must be the mysterious bride we've all been hearing about." "James," Lucien nodded. "May I introduce my wife, Nadine?" "Nadine, this is James Hunter." "A pleasure," Nadine said, offering her hand. "The pleasure is mine," Hunter replied, his eyes appraising her openly. "Lucien, you've been holding out on us. When you announced your sudden marriage, we all wondered what kind of woman had finally captured the elusive Lucien Albrecht. Now I see." Throughout the evening, similar scenes repeated. Surprise, appraisal, comments that reduced her to an ornament. Nadine maintained her dignity, but with each introduction, each surprised reaction, she felt more like a possession being displayed. "Lucien never mentioned how beautiful you are," said one woman, the wife of a board member. "Where have you been hiding her?" asked another businessman. "What a lovely addition to our circle," commented an older socialite, with the tone one might use to discuss a new piece of furniture. During a momentary break from introductions, Nadine slipped away to a quiet gallery displaying African art. She stood before a mask from Benin, finding peace in its silent presence. "Escaping," Lucien's voice came from behind her. "Just taking a breath," she replied without turning. He moved to stand beside her. "You've impressed everyone tonight. Because I can string sentences together and don't embarrass you." The bitterness in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. "Because you have a natural grace that none of them expected," Lucien said quietly. Nadine finally turned to him. "They didn't expect it because you didn't expect it. What did you tell them about me, Lucien? Or did you say nothing at all, let them assume I was someone to be tolerated for your father's inheritance?" Before he could answer, a woman's voice cut through the gallery. "Lucien, is that you hiding back here?" They both turned to see a tall, blonde woman approaching. Her red dress clung to her figure, and diamonds glittered at her throat. Something in Lucien's posture immediately stiffened. "Victoria," he said flatly, "I didn't realize you were back in Boston. Just flew in yesterday." She smiled, then turned curious eyes to Nadine. "And this is my wife," Lucien said. "Nadine, this is Victoria Sanderson, an old friend." The way Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose told Nadine everything. This was no friend. This was history. "Wife?" Victoria's laugh was like glass breaking. "Well, that was fast. Last I heard, you were still licking your wounds after I left." "Things change," Lucien said coldly. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she assessed Nadine. "They certainly do. How interesting." She turned back to Lucien. "We should catch up while I'm in town, for old time's sake." After she sauntered away, a heavy silence fell between them. "Your ex, I assume?" Nadine finally asked. "Ex-fiancé," Lucien admitted. "It ended badly." "I see." Lucien ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking tired. "We should go back. People will notice our absence." As they returned to the main hall, Nadine felt Victoria's eyes following them. There was something calculating in that gaze, something that promised trouble. Later that night, as their car pulled away from the museum, Lucien broke the silence. "You handled yourself well tonight. I'm not a child, Lucien. I know how to behave in public." He turned to look at her, really look at her for perhaps the first time. "Who are you, Nadine Clark? Beyond the contract, beyond this arrangement, who did I actually marry?" Nadine met his gaze steadily. "Someone who was willing to sacrifice her freedom for her family, just like you. The difference is I never pretended it was anything else." When they arrived home, Nadine went straight to her room. But as she changed out of her gown, she caught herself wondering about the man she had married. Not the cold businessman, but the person underneath. The one who had looked at her tonight with genuine curiosity. The one who might, just might, be more than the contract they had signed. The following Sunday, Nadine was reading in the living room when Lucien emerged from his home office, looking surprised to find her there. "I thought you'd be out," he said. "It's raining," she replied, nodding toward the windows where water streamed down the glass. An awkward silence fell. Then Lucien noticed the book in her hands. "East of Eden," he said. "Steinbeck." Nadine nodded. "You know it?" "It's one of my favorites." He hesitated, then gestured to the chair across from her. "Do you mind if I join you?" She shook her head, and he sat, the tension between them shifting into something less hostile, something almost companionable. "There's a passage," Lucien said after a moment, "about how we have a choice in life, about good and evil, about who we become." "Timshel," Nadine quoted softly. "Thou mayest," the most important word, according to the book. Their eyes met, and for a moment something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. The moment was broken by Lucian's phone ringing. He checked the screen and frowned. "I need to take this." As he walked away, answering the call, Nadine watched him go. For the first time since their wedding, she wondered if there might be more to Lucien Albrecht than the cold man who had lifted her veil, more than the contract that bound them, more than the arrangement that had brought them together. But then she remembered his face before he'd seen hers, the disdain, the assumption, and she hardened her heart once more. One shared book didn't change who he was. One moment of connection didn't erase his judgment of her. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, while inside, the walls between two strangers began to show the first hairline cracks. October arrived in Boston, painting the city in shades of gold and crimson. Nadine stood at the window of the penthouse, watching leaves dance across the street below. 2 months of marriage had passed, 2 months of careful distance and rare, accidental moments of connection. The ringing of her phone broke the silence. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. "Grandma," Nadine answered warmly. "How are you?" "Better now that the bank's off our backs," Eleanor said. "The repairs to the roof are finally done. No more buckets when it rains." Nadine smiled, picturing the old house in Savannah. "I'm glad. And you, child? How's that husband of yours treating you?" Nadine hesitated. "We have an understanding. He works. I volunteer at the literacy center. We stay out of each other's way." "That's no marriage," Eleanor sighed. "It was never meant to be a real marriage, Grandma, just a contract." "Contracts can be broken," Eleanor said wisely. "Hearts, too. Be careful, child." After hanging up, Nadine touched the wedding ring on her finger. A beautiful piece of jewelry that meant nothing, just like her role as Lucien Albrecht's wife. The sound of the front door opening surprised her. Lucien rarely came home this early. She heard voices in the hallway, his and another man's. Curious, she moved toward the living room. "Nadine," Lucien said, looking startled to find her there. "I didn't realize you'd be home." A tall, distinguished man with salt and pepper hair stood beside him, watching Nadine with interest. "This is Richard Montgomery," Lucien introduced, "my father's former business partner and oldest friend. Richard, my wife, Nadine." "Mrs. Albrecht," Richard stepped forward, taking her hand. "A pleasure to finally meet you. I've been abroad since the wedding." "Mr. Montgomery?" Nadine nodded politely. "Please, Richard," he insisted, his eyes appraising her with a warmth Lucien's had never shown. "I came as soon as I returned to the States. I had to meet the woman who fulfilled old Gerald's final wish." Something in his tone caught Nadine's attention. "You knew about the arrangement?" Richard exchanged a glance with Lucien. "I helped Gerald with many things toward the end," he said carefully, "including his wishes for his son's future." "Richard will be staying for dinner," Lucien interjected, clearly wanting to change the subject. "I'll let Mrs. Hayes know," Nadine said, understanding she was being dismissed. As she turned to leave, Richard called after her. "I hope we'll have time to talk, Nadine. I'd like to know the woman Gerald chose." His words followed her down the hallway. Chose. Not just any arranged marriage, then. Somehow, Lucien's father had specifically selected her. But why? She had never met Gerald Albrecht, had never even heard his name until the lawyer approached Eleanor with the proposal. In her room, Nadine changed for dinner, her mind racing with questions. What did Richard Montgomery know about the arrangement that she didn't? Dinner was a formal affair, with Mrs. Hayes serving her signature roast and potatoes. Richard dominated the conversation with stories of his travels and memories of Gerald Albrecht. "He was a hard man," Richard said, swirling his wine, "but fair. And he wanted the best for you, Lucien, even if his methods were unconventional. Forcing me into marriage or losing everything?" Lucien's voice was tight. "Hardly what I'd call paternal concern." Richard's eyes shifted to Nadine. "And yet, here you are, with a lovely wife who brings grace to this cold apartment of yours." He turned fully to Nadine. "Tell me, my dear, how are you finding Boston?" "It's beautiful," Nadine replied carefully, "though very different from Savannah." "Ah, Savannah," Richard smiled. "The Spanish moss, the squares, the history. I spent some time there years ago. The Clark family has deep roots there, I understand." Nadine's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "You know my family. I make it my business to know things," Richard said, his eyes twinkling. "The Clarks have been in Savannah since before the Civil War, once quite prominent, I believe." Lucien was watching the exchange with growing suspicion. "Richard, why exactly are you here?" The older man chuckled. "Direct as always, Lucien. Very well, I came because Gerald asked me to check on you both after the first months of marriage. to make sure his plan was progressing. Plan? Lucian's voice hardened. What plan? Richard set down his wineglass. Gerald knew you, Lucian. Knew you'd marry someone to secure your inheritance, then divorce her once the year was up. That's why he added certain conditions to the trust. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Nadine looked between the two men, sensing tension rising. What conditions? Lucian demanded. The full inheritance doesn't transfer after just 1 year of marriage, Richard explained calmly. It transfers when Gerald's trustees, of which I am one, determine the marriage is genuine. Lucian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. That wasn't in the paperwork. It was in the fine print of the trust documents, Richard replied. Your lawyers should have caught it. And what exactly constitutes a genuine marriage? Lucian's voice was dangerously quiet. Richard spread his hands. That's for the trustees to decide, but separate bedrooms and parallel lives probably won't convince anyone. Nadine felt heat rise to her face. You're monitoring our private life? Not actively, Richard assured her. But the trustees will require evidence of a real partnership before releasing the full inheritance. Gerald was very specific. Lucian's hands clenched at his sides. So my father is controlling me from the grave. He's trying to give you what he and your mother had, Richard said softly. A true marriage, not just a business arrangement. My parents' marriage was hardly ideal, Lucian scoffed. You only saw the end, Richard replied. After your mother's illness changed everything. Before that, they were happy, truly happy. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Finally, Nadine stood. If you'll excuse me, I think I need some air. Neither man objected as she left the dining room, grabbing her coat from the closet before stepping out onto the terrace. The night air was crisp with autumn chill, but she welcomed it, trying to process what she'd just learned. The door slid open behind her, and Richard Montgomery stepped out. I've upset you, he said. I apologize. Nadine shook her head. I'm just processing. All this time, I thought the arrangement was simple. Save my family's land in exchange for 1 year of my life. Richard leaned against the railing beside her. Gerald Albrecht was many things, but simple was not one of them. Why me? Nadine asked directly. Of all the women in the world, why did he choose me for his son? Richard studied her face in the dim light. Gerald had his reasons. He researched extensively before making his choice. That's not an answer. Richard smiled. No, it's not. But it's all I can give you for now. Some things, Nadine, need to unfold in their own time. Inside, they could see Lucian pacing the living room, phone to his ear, clearly calling his lawyers. He's angry, Nadine observed. He's been angry for a long time, Richard said quietly. Since his mother died when he was a teenager, since his father grew distant, anger is safer than pain. Nadine thought about the cold man she'd married, the walls he maintained. And now? What happens now? That, Richard said, is entirely up to you both. After Richard left, Lucian locked himself in his office. Nadine heard raised voices as he argued with someone on the phone, presumably his lawyer. Hours passed before the door finally opened, and he emerged looking exhausted. Nadine was curled on the living room sofa with a book, though she hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. My lawyer confirms it, Lucian said without preamble. The trust has conditions beyond the 1-year marriage requirement. The trustees have discretion to determine when the marriage qualifies as genuine before releasing the full inheritance. And if they never do, Nadine asked, then I get only a small portion, enough to live comfortably, but not the company or the bulk of the estate. He ran a hand through his hair. My father's final manipulation. Nadine closed her book. What does this mean for our arrangement? Lucian dropped into the chair across from her. It means we need to convince Richard and the other trustees that this marriage is real. How? We'll have to be seen together more, attend events as a couple, share meals, create the appearance of a genuine relationship. He hesitated. We may need to adjust our living arrangements. Nadine stiffened. I'm not sharing your bed for appearances, Lucian. That's not what I meant, he said quickly. But the separate bedrooms, the separate lives, it's too obvious. We need to at least appear to be building a life together. Nadine considered this. What exactly are you proposing? A renegotiation of our contract, Lucian said, slipping easily into business terms. We present ourselves as a happy couple in public. We work on appearing comfortable together. We create a narrative of a growing relationship. And in return, your family's land is already secured, Lucian pointed out. But I can increase your monthly allowance and, he hesitated. When this is over, when the inheritance is secured, You'll receive a significant settlement, enough to never worry about money again. Nadine felt something inside her shrink. Always the transaction, always the business arrangement, never the person. "Is that all I am to you?" she asked quietly. "A business problem to be solved?" Something flickered in Lucian's eyes. Surprise, perhaps even a hint of shame. But it vanished quickly. "This was always a business arrangement," he reminded her. "Nothing has changed except the timeline and requirements." Nadine stood. "Everything has changed, Lucian. I agreed to be your wife on paper for 1 year. Now you're asking me to pretend to love you until some trustees are convinced it's real, to live a lie indefinitely." "Not love," Lucian corrected uncomfortably. "Just partnership." "A partnership requires respect," Nadine said. "Equality. Have you ever seen me as your equal, Lucian? Or am I just a means to your inheritance?" Before he could answer, she walked away, closing her bedroom door firmly behind her. Only then did she allow tears to fall, not for the new arrangement, but for the reminder of how little she mattered beyond her usefulness. The next morning, Nadine woke to find a note slipped under her door. "I have an event tonight, the Philharmonic Gala, 7 p.m. I hope you'll join me. L." Not an apology, not even a real invitation, just another business requirement. She should refuse, walk away from this increasingly complicated arrangement. But where would she go? What would happen to her grandmother's land if she broke the contract? At exactly 6:45 that evening, Nadine emerged from her room in a simple black dress, her hair swept up elegantly. Lucian was waiting in the living room, his expression unreadable as he took in her appearance. "You look lovely," he said formally. "Thank you." Her response was equally detached. The car ride to Symphony Hall was silent. Only as they approached the entrance did Lucian turn to her. "Nadine, about last night, we have an audience waiting," she interrupted, nodding toward the photographers at the entrance. "Shall we begin the performance?" Something like hurt flashed in his eyes, but he nodded, exiting the car and coming around to open her door. As they walked the red carpet, his hand rested at the small of her back, a gesture that would appear loving to observers, but felt mechanical to Nadine. Inside, the grand hall sparkled with chandeliers and evening wear. As they moved through the crowd, Lucian kept Nadine close, his hand never leaving her waist. To anyone watching, they might have appeared the perfect couple. "Lucian!" A familiar voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. Victoria Sanderson approached, resplendent in a gold gown that seemed designed to draw every eye. "And your lovely wife. How nice to see you both again." Her smile was sharp as a knife. Nadine felt Lucian's hand tighten slightly at her waist. "Victoria," he acknowledged coolly, "I didn't realize you had an interest in classical music." "Oh, I have many interests you never discovered," Victoria purred. Her eyes flicked to Nadine. "I was just telling Edward Blanchard about your whirlwind romance. Such a charming story." Nadine felt Lucian tense beside her. "I'm sure Edward has better things to discuss." "Not at all," Victoria insisted. "Everyone is fascinated. The elusive Lucian Albrecht, married so suddenly to someone no one had ever heard of." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "So unlike the carefully vetted socialites you used to date." The insult was veiled, but clear. Before Lucian could respond, Nadine spoke. "Sometimes the unexpected turns out to be exactly what we need," she said calmly, placing her hand over Lucian's where it rested at her waist. "Don't you think, Victoria?" Victoria's perfect smile faltered slightly. "How sweet. Tell me, Nadine, how are you finding Boston society? It must be quite different from—" "Where was it again?" "Savannah," Nadine replied evenly. "And yes, it's different. People here tend to mistake wealth for worth. It's an easy confusion to make." Victoria's eyes widened slightly at the implied criticism. "Well," she recovered, "I should circulate, but we must have lunch soon, Nadine. I have so many stories about Lucian I'm sure you'd love to hear." As she walked away, Nadine felt Lucian relax slightly beside her. "Thank you," he said quietly. "She can be venomous?" Nadine suggested. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I was going to say challenging, but your word is more accurate." For the first time that evening, something genuine passed between them, a shared moment of understanding. "She was important to you once," Nadine observed as they moved toward their seats. Lucian's face closed again. "I thought she was. I was wrong." The lights dimmed, signaling the start of the performance. As the first notes of Beethoven's Symphony No. 7 filled the hall, Nadine found herself acutely aware of Lucian beside her, the careful distance between them. The warmth of his arm occasionally brushing hers, the faint scent of his cologne. Halfway through the performance, she glanced over to find him watching her instead of the orchestra. Their eyes met in the dim light, and for a moment, neither looked away. There was a question in his gaze, something searching that made Nadine's heart beat faster. Then the movement ended, breaking the spell as the audience applauded. Lucian turned his attention back to the stage, but something had shifted between them, something neither was ready to acknowledge. "That was beautiful," Nadine said, as they left Symphony Hall, the cool night air a relief after the crowded interior. "You enjoyed it?" Lucian seemed genuinely interested in her answer. "Very much. My grandmother used to play classical records on Sunday afternoons. Beethoven was her favorite." As they waited for their car, Lucian hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to get a drink somewhere or perhaps dessert?" Nadine looked at him in surprise. This wasn't part of the performance. The gala was over. No one important was watching. "Why?" she asked directly. Lucian seemed taken aback by the question. "Why not? It's still early. Is this part of the new arrangement, creating the appearance of a date night?" His expression hardened slightly. "I was simply asking if you wanted dessert, Nadine, not proposing a complex strategy." She studied his face, trying to read his intentions. Finally, she nodded. "There's a cafe near the penthouse that I've been wanting to try. They're supposed to have excellent chocolate cake." The tension in Lucian's shoulders eased. Chocolate cake it is. The cafe was small and warmly lit, with mismatched furniture and the rich aroma of coffee. They found a table in the corner, away from the windows, where no one would recognize the CEO of Albrecht Industries and his mysterious wife. "So," Lucian said after they ordered, "you were a teacher." Nadine nodded, surprised he remembered. "Third grade, for 4 years. Did you enjoy it?" "Very much," she said, warmth entering her voice. There's something magical about the moment a child understands something new, when their eyes light up with discovery. "You miss it," Lucian observed. "I do. The literacy center helps, but it's not the same." Their desserts arrived, chocolate cake for Nadine, apple tart for Lucian. As they ate, the conversation continued, cautious but civil. "What about you?" Nadine asked. "Did you always want to follow in your father's footsteps?" A shadow crossed Lucian's face. "I wanted to study architecture, actually. Design buildings that would last for generations." This surprised her. "What happened?" "My father happened," Lucian said simply. "After my mother died, he became focused on the legacy of Albrecht Industries, on me continuing what he'd built. And you just gave up your dream?" Lucian's eyes met hers. "Sometimes we make sacrifices for family. You understand that better than most, I think." The parallel wasn't lost on Nadine. They had both surrendered personal desires for family obligations. He for his father's approval, she for her grandmother's security. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "Running the company instead of designing buildings." Lucian considered this. "I've made peace with it, found satisfaction in different challenges." He paused. "Though sometimes I still sketch buildings for fun, no one knows that." "No one except me now," Nadine pointed out. A small smile touched his lips. "Except you." As they walked home through the quiet streets, a comfortable silence fell between them. Not the tense, awkward silences of their first weeks together, but something almost peaceful. At the penthouse, Lucian hesitated at Nadine's bedroom door. "Thank you for tonight," he said, "for making it convincing." And just like that, the wall came back up. The reminder that this was all performance, all for show. "That's the arrangement," Nadine replied, her voice cooling. "Good night, Lucian." She closed the door, leaning against it as she heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. For a few hours she had almost forgotten the contract that bound them, had almost believed there could be something genuine between them. But Lucian had reminded her of the truth, everything. The hand at her waist, the shared dessert, the personal conversation, was just part of the act. The performance required by his father's will. And yet, as she prepared for bed, Nadine couldn't forget the way he had looked at her during the symphony. The genuine interest in his voice when he asked about her teaching. The rare smile when he admitted his secret architectural sketches. Was it all performance, or was something real beginning to emerge from behind the careful masks they both wore? The next morning, a bouquet of white roses was waiting on the kitchen counter. A card nestled among the blooms read, "For the benefit of the housekeeper, all part of the performance." Nadine tried to ignore the twinge of disappointment. Of course, the flowers weren't real, just another prop in their staged marriage. Still, she arranged them carefully in a vase, their fragrance filling the kitchen. When Mrs. Hayes arrived to prepare breakfast, her eyes lit up at the sight. Oh, how lovely. The master never used to bring flowers home, Nadine forced a smile. People change, I suppose. Indeed they do, Mrs. Hayes agreed, bustling about the kitchen. And if you don't mind my saying so, Mrs. Albrecht, this place has felt different since you arrived. Warmer somehow. Nadine's phone rang before she could respond. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. Grandma? Is everything okay? It was unlike Eleanor to call this early. Nadine! Eleanor's voice was tight with worry. There's been a problem. A man came by yesterday asking questions about you and the Albrecht marriage. Nadine's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? About how the arrangement came about. About our financial situation. He claimed to be from a magazine, but he didn't have any identification. Eleanor paused. He knew things, Nadine. Private things about our agreement with Mr. Albrecht's lawyers. Did he say who sent him? No, but he left his card. Someone named David Winters, from Sentinel Investigations. Eleanor's voice lowered. Nadine, I think someone's trying to prove your marriage isn't legitimate. Nadine's mind raced. Don't worry, Grandma. I'll handle this. After assuring Eleanor everything would be fine, she ended the call and immediately went to find Lucian. He was in his home office, already dressed for work, reviewing documents on his laptop. He looked up in surprise when she entered without knocking. Someone's investigating our marriage, she said without preamble. A private investigator went to my grandmother in Savannah, asking questions about the arrangement. Lucian's expression darkened. David Winters? Yes. You know him? Victoria used him during our breakup, Lucian said grimly, to dig up dirt for leverage in our property dispute. Nadine's stomach sank. So, Victoria is behind this? Most likely. Lucian set aside his laptop. But why? What does she gain from exposing our arrangement? Maybe she's just spiteful, Nadine suggested. You said the breakup was bad. It was, Lucian admitted. But this seems extreme, even for her. He fell silent, thinking. Finally, he looked up at Nadine. We need to accelerate our plan. If Victoria is trying to expose us, we need to be beyond reproach. Give her nothing to use against us. What are you suggesting? Lucian stood, pacing the office. We make this look as real as possible. Share more public appearances. Let people see us together, happy, connected. And we need to address the living arrangements issue. I told you, I'm not suggesting we share a bedroom, Lucian interrupted, but we need to at least share spaces, meals, time together. If someone is watching, and they probably are, separate lives won't convince anyone. Nadine crossed her arms. And what about your ex-fiancée? Shouldn't we confront her? Not yet, Lucian said. First, we shore up our defenses, make the marriage look unassailable. Then we deal with Victoria. As much as Nadine hated to admit it, his strategy made sense. If their arrangement was exposed, her grandmother might lose everything. The bank could claim fraud, demand the money back. The land would be gone. Fine, she agreed reluctantly. What's our next move? Tonight, Lucian said, we have dinner at my favorite restaurant, where I'm known, where people will notice us together, talking, enjoying each other's company. He hesitated. And this weekend we go away together, somewhere public enough to be seen but private enough to seem romantic. And if Victoria has someone following us? Lucian's eyes met hers, determination hardening his features. Then we give them a show they can't possibly question. As Nadine left his office, she couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. Their careful arrangement was becoming more complicated by the day. The lines between performance and reality increasingly blurred, and somewhere in Boston, Victoria Sanderson was plotting to tear it all apart. Victoria sat in her penthouse across town, a glass of champagne in her hand, as David Winters delivered his report. The marriage definitely started as an arrangement, the investigator confirmed. The grandmother's property was in foreclosure. The timing aligns perfectly with the wedding. Victoria smiled, satisfaction curling through her. And their current living situation? Separate bedrooms, minimal interaction until recently. Winters hesitated, though that seems to be changing. They attended the Philharmonic together last night, went for dessert afterward, seemed comfortable. Victoria's smile faltered. Comfortable? They're either very good actors or they're developing actual feelings, Victoria finished, her voice hard. Unacceptable. She rose, moving to the window that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, Lucian was with his new wife, the woman who had taken what should have been hers. Keep watching them, she instructed Winters. I want to know everything, every interaction, every moment. She turned back to him, eyes glittering. And find me something I can use. Something beyond just an arranged marriage. Miss Sanderson, Winters said carefully, may I ask what you hope to gain from this? The marriage appears legal, even if it started as an arrangement. Victoria's laugh was cold. Oh, David, this isn't about legality, this is about justice. She took a sip of champagne. Lucien Albrecht humiliated me, refused to fight for me, and now he thinks he can replace me with some nobody from Georgia. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against the crystal glass. I'm going to make sure he loses everything. The inheritance, the company, and especially that wife he never wanted in the first place. Winters nodded, knowing better than to question further. As he left, Victoria returned to the window, her reflection superimposed over the city lights. Enjoy your little charade while it lasts, Lucien, she whispered. It won't be long now. In her hand, the champagne glass cracked under pressure, sending a thin line of liquid down her wrist like blood. The Albrecht family beach house in Cape Cod stood like a sentinel against the grey November sky. White clapboard and weathered shingles, imposing yet somehow welcoming, much like the family that had built it generations ago. Nadine stood at the window of the master bedroom, watching waves crash against the shore. This was to be their weekend retreat, their opportunity to present themselves as a loving couple away from Boston's prying eyes, yet still visible enough for word to get back to Victoria and the trustees. The caretaker has stocked the kitchen, Lucien said from the doorway, and there's a reservation at the Lighthouse for dinner tonight. It's the most popular restaurant in town. Making sure we're seen, Nadine noted. That's the point of this weekend. He hesitated. I've taken the guest room down the hall. This one has the better view. Nadine turned to face him. In casual clothes, jeans and a sweater instead of his usual suits, Lucien looked different, younger, less guarded. Your family has owned this place for a long time, she asked. My grandfather built it in the 1950s, Lucien replied, moving to stand beside her at the window. It's one of the few family possessions I actually care about. My mother loved it here. And your father? Something tightened in Lucien's expression. He preferred the city, business, connections. My mother would bring me here during summers while he stayed in Boston. It must hold a lot of memories. It does. His voice softened. Happy ones mostly before she got sick. Nadine studied his profile, seeing grief etched there. What happened to her? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, early onset Alzheimer's. She was diagnosed when I was 14. By 17, she barely recognized me. The pain in his voice was raw, unguarded. For the first time, Nadine saw past the cold businessman to the boy who had lost his mother too young. I'm sorry, she said softly. That must have been terribly hard. Lucien's eyes met hers, surprise flickering there, as if he hadn't expected genuine sympathy. It was. My father, he couldn't handle it. Buried himself in work, left me to watch her fade away. Is that why you're angry with him? Even now? Part of it, Lucien admitted. He was never the same after her diagnosis. Neither of us were. But at least I stayed. I was there until the end. A silent understanding passed between them, the recognition of shared pain. Nadine had lost her parents young. Lucien had lost his mother to illness and his father to grief. Both knew the shape of absence. The moment stretched, something new and fragile growing in the space between them. Then Lucien stepped back, walls sliding into place again. We should get ready for dinner, he said, professional once more. The reservation is at 7. The Lighthouse restaurant lived up to its name, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. Inside, nautical elegance met New England charm, white tablecloths, hurricane lamps, and windows that showcased the churning sea beyond. Mr. Albrecht, the maitre d' greeted them warmly. It's been too long, and this must be Mrs. Albrecht. A pleasure, madam. As they were led to the best table in the house, one with panoramic ocean views, Nadine noticed heads turning. Even here, it seemed, Lucien Albrecht was recognized. The owner is an old family friend, Lucien explained after they were seated. Word will definitely get back to Boston that we were here, together. The perfect stage for our performance, Nadine said, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. Lucien studied her across the table. Does it bother you that much? Pretending. Doesn't it bother you? She countered. Living a lie. I've been living different versions of lies most of my life, he replied with unexpected honesty. The dutiful son, the ruthless CEO, the perfect heir. What's one more role to play? Before Nadine could respond, a waiter arrived with champagne. Compliments of Mr. Davidson, the owner, he explained. In celebration of your marriage. They thanked him, and after he left, an awkward silence fell. The champagne, a celebration of something that wasn't real, sat between them like an accusation. "We should practice," Lucian finally said, lifting his glass. "Practice what?" "Looking at each other like we're in love," he explained matter-of-factly. "If Victoria has someone watching us, they'll be looking for genuine connection." Nadine felt heat rise to her face. "And how exactly does one practice that?" "Eye contact, for starters. Real couples look at each other. They don't avoid each other's gaze like we do." He leaned forward slightly. "So look at me, Nadine, really look." Reluctantly, she met his eyes. Blue, not cold like she'd first thought, but deep, complex, the color of the ocean outside the window. "Now smile," Lucian instructed, "like I've just said something that delights you." "This is ridiculous," Nadine muttered, but she complied, summoning a smile. "Better," Lucian nodded, "but it doesn't reach your eyes. Try again. Think of something that genuinely makes you happy." Nadine thought of her third-grade classroom, the wall of books, the children's eager faces. Slowly, her smile softened, became real. "There," Lucian said quietly. "That's it." For a moment, something shifted in his expression, a warmth she hadn't seen before. Then he cleared his throat and sat back. "Your turn," Nadine said impulsively. "Look at me like you're in love." Lucian seemed startled by the challenge. Then his expression changed, softened. His eyes, usually so guarded, opened to her, revealing something vulnerable and yearning. It was so convincing that Nadine felt her breath catch. "How did you do that?" she asked when he finally looked away. He shrugged, reaching for his water glass. "I'm good at playing roles, I told you that." The waiter returned to take their order, breaking the strange tension that had developed. As they selected their meals, Nadine found herself watching Lucian, the confident way he spoke, the occasional smile he offered the staff, the public persona that seemed both natural and practiced. How many layers did this man have? And was she beginning to glimpse something real beneath them all? After dinner, they walked along the beach, bundled against the November chill. The moon cast silver light across the waves, and their footprints stretched behind them in the wet sand. "My mother used to say the ocean has a memory," Lucian said unexpectedly, "that every wave remembers every shore it's ever touched." Nadine smiled at the thought. "That's beautiful." She was poetic that way, always finding magic in ordinary things. He picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water's surface. "I think that's why the disease was so cruel. It stole her words first." Without thinking, Nadine reached out and touched his arm, a simple gesture of comfort that felt strangely significant. "What about your parents?" Lucian asked. "You never mentioned them." "Car accident when I was 8, Nadine replied. "My grandmother raised me after that." "I'm sorry," Lucian said, echoing her earlier sympathy. "Was it just the two of you?" Nadine nodded. "My grandfather died before I was born. There were cousins nearby, but mainly it was just us. Grandma and me in that big old house." "You love her very much," Lucian observed. "Enough to marry a stranger to save her home." "She saved me first," Nadine said simply. "After my parents died, I stopped speaking for almost a year. Trauma, the doctors said. But Grandma never pushed. She just sat with me every day, reading stories, talking about her garden, being present. When I finally spoke again, it was to ask her about the roses she was planting." They walked in silence for a moment, the rhythm of the waves a soothing backdrop. "We're not so different, you and I," Lucian finally said, "both shaped by loss, both willing to sacrifice for family." Nadine looked up at him, really seeing him perhaps for the first time. Not the cold businessman, not the reluctant husband, just a man who, like her, had experienced pain and persevered. "No," she agreed softly, "I suppose we're not." As they turned back toward the beach house, Lucian's hand brushed against hers. Neither pulled away. And when his fingers tentatively interlaced with hers, Nadine allowed it, telling herself it was just part of the performance. But the warmth that spread through her felt unexpectedly real. In the morning, Nadine woke to the sound of the ocean and the smell of coffee. Following the aroma downstairs, she found Lucian in the kitchen, dressed in sweatpants and a faded Harvard t-shirt, scrambling eggs at the stove. "You cook?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. He glanced up with a small smile. "Don't sound so shocked. I lived alone before our arrangement. I just assumed you had a personal chef or something." "Only for formal occasions," Lucian admitted, sliding eggs onto 2 plates already laid with toast. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." The domesticity of the scene caught Nadine off guard. This version of Lucian, casual, making breakfast, oddly at ease, was yet another layer she hadn't expected. They ate at the kitchen island, the conversation surprisingly comfortable. No talk of arrangements or performances, just simple morning chat about the weather, the town, plans for the day. There's an art festival in the village today, Lucian mentioned. Local artists, food stalls, that sort of thing. Might be worth checking out. I'd like that, Nadine agreed. As she helped clear the dishes, Nadine's phone rang. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. Grandma? Is everything okay? After the investigator's visit, any call from Eleanor sparked concern. Everything's fine, child, Eleanor assured her. Just checking in. How's that fancy beach house? It's beautiful, Nadine said, glancing at Lucian, who was loading the dishwasher with surprising efficiency. We're going to an art festival today. We? Eleanor's voice lifted with interest. So you two are spending actual time together now? It's complicated, Grandma, Nadine sighed, stepping onto the deck for privacy. Things have evolved. Complicated is just another word for interesting, Eleanor chuckled. Tell me, child, is he still as cold as you first described? Nadine watched through the window as Lucian moved around the kitchen, so different from the rigid businessman she'd married. No, she admitted. He's not what I expected. The good ones never are, Eleanor said wisely. Your grandfather seemed all gruff and serious when I met him. Turned out he wrote poetry and cried at sad movies. After promising to call again soon, Nadine ended the call and returned inside. Lucian looked up from wiping the counter. Everything okay with your grandmother? Fine, Nadine nodded. Just checking in. She must worry about you, Lucian observed, being so far away with a stranger. You're not exactly a stranger anymore, Nadine pointed out before she could stop herself. Their eyes met, acknowledgement passing between them. Whatever they were to each other now, it was more than the cold strangers who had stood at that altar 3 months ago. The village of Wellfleet was transformed for the art festival. Colourful tents lined the main street, artists displaying paintings, sculptures, and crafts. The November air was crisp, but sunshine bathed the scene in golden light. As they strolled among the exhibits, Nadine felt Lucian's hand at the small of her back, the touch that had once seemed so mechanical, now feeling almost natural. See anything you like? He asked, as they paused before a display of seascape paintings. These are beautiful, Nadine said, drawn to a painting of waves crashing against rocks at sunset. The artist really captures the power of the ocean. It would look good in the penthouse, Lucian suggested. That wall in the living room is too empty. Nadine glanced at him in surprise. You want me to decorate your home? Our home, he corrected, then hesitated. At least for now. It should reflect both of us, not just me. The significance wasn't lost on Nadine. Another step in their evolving arrangement, yet it felt like something more. As Lucian arranged the purchase and delivery of the painting, Nadine wandered to the next tent, where handmade jewelry was displayed. She was admiring a pair of pearl earrings when a voice spoke behind her. They'd suit you. Nadine turned to find an elegant older woman with silver hair watching her with interest. They're lovely, Nadine agreed. You're staying at the Albrecht place, the woman said. Not a question. I'm Margaret Foster. I've known the Albrechts for decades. Nadine Albrecht, she introduced herself, the name still strange on her tongue. Margaret's eyes were kind but shrewd. Gerald's daughter-in-law. Yes, I heard Lucian had married. Rather suddenly. There was a question in her tone, an invitation to explain. Before Nadine could respond, Lucian appeared at her side. Mrs. Foster, he greeted the older woman warmly. It's been years. Lucian, Margaret smiled. I was just meeting your lovely wife. Your father would have been pleased. Something flickered in Lucian's eyes. Surprise, perhaps doubt. You think so? Oh yes, Margaret nodded confidently. Gerald always said you needed someone with depth, not just a pretty face. Her gaze shifted to Nadine. He would have appreciated her strength. It reminds me of your mother. Lucian seemed genuinely taken aback. You see my mother in Nadine? The quiet dignity, Margaret confirmed, the way she observes before she speaks. Elizabeth was the same way. She reached out to pat Nadine's hand. It was lovely to meet you, my dear. You must both come for dinner before you leave. As she walked away, Nadine turned to Lucian. Your father discussed what kind of woman you should marry with his friends? Apparently, Lucian said, looking troubled, though I never heard him express any opinion on the matter while he was alive. They continued through the festival, but Lucian seemed distracted, Margaret's words clearly weighing on him. When they stopped at a food truck for lunch, he finally spoke. There's something about this whole arrangement I'm missing, he said. Why you specifically? What did my father know about you that made him choose you? I've been wondering the same thing, Nadine admitted. I never met your father. Never even heard of him until the lawyer approached my grandmother. Lucian's phone rang, interrupting the moment. He checked the screen and frowned. It's the office. I need to take this. As he stepped away to answer the call, Nadine found a bench and sat, watching the festival crowd. Families, couples, friends, normal relationships built on choice and feeling, not contracts and conditions. Yet here she was, playing at marriage with a man who grew less of a stranger each day. A man whose hand at her back no longer felt like a performance, whose smile over breakfast had seemed genuine, whose pain over his mother's illness had touched her heart. What was real anymore? What was pretend? Lucian returned, his expression tense. "We need to go back to Boston," he said without preamble. "There's a situation at the company." "What's happened?" "Victoria happened," he said grimly. "She's made a move on Albrecht Industries." The drive back to Boston was tense, with Lucian making calls from the car while Nadine stared out the window, their peaceful weekend shattered. "She's convinced 3 board members to support her investment group's buyout offer," Lucian explained between calls. "She's using the uncertainty around my inheritance to suggest the company needs new leadership." "Can she do that?" Nadine asked. "Not without majority board support, but she's making progress." His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "This was her plan all along. Discredit our marriage, challenge the inheritance, weaken my position, then swoop in with a takeover. All because you broke up with her." Lucian's laugh was bitter. "I didn't break up with her. She left me for a shipping magnate with more money and connections. Then he left her 6 months later for someone younger." His eyes met Nadine's briefly. "Victoria doesn't handle rejection well, so this is revenge. And opportunity," Lucian added. "Albrecht Industries would be a valuable acquisition, and Victoria has always been ambitious." When they reached Boston, Lucian dropped Nadine at the penthouse before heading straight to the office for an emergency meeting. The apartment felt strangely empty without him, a realization that unsettled her. Hours later, when he finally returned, exhaustion lined his face. He dropped onto the sofa, loosening his tie with a weary sigh. "That bad?" Nadine asked, bringing him a glass of scotch from the bar cart. He accepted it gratefully. "I've stabilized things for now, called in some favors, reminded certain board members of their contractual obligations." He took a long sip. "But Victoria's not backing down. She's scheduled a full board meeting for next week to formally present her offer." "What can I do?" Nadine found herself asking. Lucian looked up in surprise. "You want to help?" "This affects me too," she pointed out. "If you lose the company, if our arrangement is exposed, your grandmother's land." Lucian nodded in understanding. "Of course, but it wasn't just the land Nadine was thinking of. Somehow, somewhere along the way, Lucian's problems had become her problems. His fight had become her fight. "There's a board dinner tomorrow night," Lucian said after a moment. "Spouses are expected to attend. Having you there, having them see us together as a solid unit, would help counter Victoria's narrative." "Then I'll be there," Nadine said simply. Lucian studied her face. "This is beyond our original arrangement, beyond what I have the right to ask of you." "I know," Nadine acknowledged. "But I'm offering anyway." Something passed between them then, gratitude, understanding, and something deeper neither was ready to name. "Thank you," Lucian said softly. As she turned to leave, he caught her hand. The touch sent warmth through her veins. "Nadine," he began, then hesitated. "These past few days at the beach house, it wasn't all performance for me." Her heart quickened. "It wasn't?" "No." His eyes held hers, more open than she'd ever seen them. "I don't know what that means yet. For us. For this arrangement. But I wanted you to know." He released her hand, and Nadine retreated to her room, mind spinning. What had begun as a cold business transaction was evolving into something neither of them had anticipated. Something that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. The board dinner was held at the exclusive Somerset Club, a bastion of old Boston wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers illuminated dark wood paneling and oil portraits of stern-faced men from another era. The perfect setting for the power struggle unfolding within Albrecht Industries. Nadine wore a deep green gown that highlighted her eyes and elegant neck. When she emerged from her room, Lucian's appreciative gaze sent a flush of warmth through her. "You look beautiful," he said, and for once there was nothing businesslike in his tone. "Thank you," she replied softly. "Ready for battle?" His smile was grim but genuine. "With you by my side?" "Absolutely." At the club, board members and their spouses mingled over cocktails. Nadine felt eyes following her, assessing, judging, wondering. She held her head high, channeling the quiet dignity that had sustained her through years of similar scrutiny in Savannah. Nadine, Lucien, Richard Montgomery approached, champagne in hand. Glad you could make it. Interesting times at Albrecht Industries, I hear. Nothing I can't handle, Lucien replied confidently. Richard's eyes twinkled. Your father would have expected nothing less. His gaze shifted to Nadine. And how are you finding married life, my dear? Before she could answer, a ripple passed through the crowd. Victoria Sanderson had arrived, resplendent in a red gown that demanded attention. At her side was an older man Nadine didn't recognize, distinguished, silver-haired, exuding power. Harold Green, Lucien murmured to Nadine, CEO of Pinnacle Investments, Victoria's financial backing for the takeover. Victoria spotted them immediately, a predatory smile curving her lips as she steered Harold in their direction. Lucien, she greeted with false warmth, and Nadine, lovely to see you both. Harold, you remember Lucien Albrecht, of course. And this is his wife, Nadine. The slight pause before the word wife was deliberate, a subtle implication of doubt. A pleasure. Harold extended his hand to Nadine. Victoria has told me so much about your whirlwind romance. Again, that pause, that hint of disbelief. Some connections don't require years to form, Nadine replied smoothly. When it's right, you know. She placed her hand on Lucien's arm, a gesture both possessive and supportive. He covered her hand with his, and the united front they presented was not lost on Victoria, whose smile tightened. How fortunate, she said, voice dripping with insincerity. Though I've always believed that truly knowing someone takes time. Don't you agree, Harold? Generally, yes, the older man nodded, especially in business. Due diligence is essential before any significant investment. The double meaning was clear. Victoria's eyes gleamed with triumph. If you'll excuse us, Lucien said coolly, I see some board members I need to speak with before dinner. As they moved away, Nadine felt Victoria's gaze boring into her back. She's dangerous, she murmured to Lucien. Very, he agreed. But so am I when something matters to me. The dinner itself was a masterclass in subtle warfare. Seated at the head table with key board members, Lucien was charm personified, confident, engaging, clearly in command. Nadine matched his efforts, drawing on all the social grace Eleanor had instilled in her to win over the wives of board members. You've changed him, Mrs. Harrington, wife of the CFO, commented to Nadine over dessert. There's a lightness to Lucien I haven't seen in years. Marriage agrees with him, Nadine replied carefully. With both of you, it seems, the older woman observed. The way he looks at you, well, it reminds me of how Daniel looked at me when we were newlyweds. That's rare these days. Across the room, Victoria was working her own magic, moving from one board member to another, Harold Green at her side, lending credibility to whatever promises she was making. As coffee was served, Richard Montgomery rose to offer a toast. To Gerald Albrecht, he began, whose vision built this company, and to Lucien and Nadine, who represent its future. Gerald would be proud to see his son not only leading Albrecht Industries with the same innovative spirit, but also finding personal happiness at last. Glasses were raised around the room, but Nadine noticed Victoria watching them closely, eyes narrowed in calculation. Later, as the evening wound down, Nadine found herself momentarily alone at their table, while Lucien spoke with a board member across the room. Victoria seized the opportunity, sliding into the chair beside her. Enjoying your role as Mrs. Albrecht? She asked, voice low and dangerous. It's not a role, Nadine replied evenly. It's who I am now. Victoria's laugh was soft and cruel. Please, we both know what this marriage is. A business arrangement, a transaction. She leaned closer. He was ashamed of you, you know, until he saw your face. The words struck with precision, finding the exact insecurity that had haunted Nadine since the wedding day. The memory of Lucien's disdain before he lifted the veil. You don't know what you're talking about, Nadine managed, though her voice wavered slightly. Don't I? Victoria's smile was venomous. I know Lucien better than anyone. Know how he judges people, categorizes them, useful or useless, worthy or unworthy. She gestured subtly around the room. Do you really think you belong in his world? That you're anything more than a temporary inconvenience he's making the best of? Before Nadine could respond, Lucien appeared at her side, his hand protectively at her waist. Victoria, he acknowledged coldly, I see you're getting to know my wife. Just girl talk, Victoria smiled, rising gracefully. Sharing stories about you, actually. your past, your preferences. She directed a meaningful look at Nadine. Ask him about the women he dated before me, Nadine. Ask what they all had in common. Then ask yourself why he looked so disgusted at your wedding, before he saw what a pretty face was hiding behind that veil. With that parting shot, she glided away, leaving a chill in her wake. What did she say to you? Lucien demanded, concern in his eyes. Nadine shook her head. Nothing important. But Victoria's words echoed in her mind. He was ashamed of you. Until he saw your face. The drive home was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. Only when they reached the penthouse did Lucien speak. You were incredible tonight, he said as they stepped into the elevator. Every board member I spoke with was impressed by you. Even Henderson, and he never likes anyone. Nadine managed a smile. Good. That should help counter Victoria's narrative. Inside the apartment, Lucien loosened his tie with a weary sigh. One battle won. But the war continues at the board meeting next week. You'll win, Nadine said with more confidence than she felt. He looked at her, really looked at her, with something like wonder. Why are you helping me like this? It's far beyond our arrangement. The question hung between them, demanding truth. Nadine found she couldn't lie. Not to him, not anymore. Because I care what happens to you, she admitted softly. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a contract to me. Lucien moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Nadine, he began, his voice rough with emotion. But Victoria's words suddenly echoed in her mind. Ask him about the women he dated before me. Ask what they all had in common. She stepped back. I'm tired. We should both get some rest. Confusion and hurt flashed across his face. Of course. Good night, Nadine. In her room, Nadine sat at the edge of her bed, Victoria's poisonous words playing on repeat in her mind. Was she right? Had Lucien's initial disdain been about more than just the arranged marriage? Had it been about her, who she was, where she came from? And if so, what had changed? Was it truly her presence, her character that had won him over? Or just her face, her appearance fitting some standard he valued? The questions haunted her late into the night, even as she recalled the warmth in his eyes at the beach house, the genuine connection they'd shared, even as her heart whispered that what was growing between them was real. Morning brought no clarity. Nadine rose early, making coffee and trying to sort through her conflicted feelings. Lucien emerged from his room, looking as if he'd slept as poorly as she had. Good morning, he said cautiously, as if testing the waters between them. Morning, she replied, pouring him coffee. Any updates on the board situation? Back to business. Safe territory. Nothing new. Lucien sighed. But my assistant called. Apparently there's an envelope that was delivered for you yesterday. He handed her a thick cream envelope with her name written in elegant script. Inside was an invitation. Victoria Sanderson requests the pleasure of your company for lunch today at 1 p.m. The Bristol Lounge, Four Seasons Hotel. Private matters to discuss. Victoria wants to meet me for lunch, Nadine said, showing Lucien the card. His expression darkened. You're not going. I think I should, Nadine countered. She obviously has something to say to me. Better to hear it directly than wonder. It's a trap, Lucien insisted. She'll try to use you, manipulate you. I'm not naive, Lucien. I grew up dealing with women like Victoria, just with southern accents and sweeter smiles hiding the same venom. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. At least let me come with you. That defeats the purpose, Nadine pointed out. I need to hear what she has to say. Alone. After further argument, Lucien reluctantly agreed, though he insisted on having his driver take her to the hotel and wait. At precisely 1 p.m., Nadine walked into the Bristol Lounge, a picture of composure in a simple blue dress, her head held high. Victoria was already seated at a corner table, watching her approach with calculating eyes. Nadine, she greeted, gesturing to the chair across from her. I'm so glad you came. I wasn't sure you would. You went to the trouble of sending an invitation, Nadine replied evenly. The least I could do was hear what you have to say. Victoria smiled, a predator's smile. Direct. I like that. It's refreshing in Lucien's world of careful diplomacy and hidden agendas. Why am I here, Victoria? Straight to business, very well. Victoria leaned forward. I'm offering you a way out. A way out of what? This sham marriage, Victoria said bluntly. This arrangement that's forcing you to live a lie far from your home, your family, everything familiar. Nadine kept her expression neutral. My marriage is not your concern. Oh, but it is, Victoria countered, because it's standing in the way of what I want. And because I think you deserve better than being Lucian's temporary convenience. What exactly are you proposing? Victoria reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope, sliding it across the table. $1 million. Cash. Transferred to any account you choose, in exchange for your honesty about the arrangement between you and Lucian. Nadine didn't touch the envelope. And why would I do that? Because you're smart, Victoria said simply. You know this marriage has an expiration date. Once Lucian secures his inheritance, once he consolidates control of the company, he won't need you anymore. Her eyes narrowed. Or do you actually believe he's fallen for you? The quiet teacher from Savannah with no connections, no fortune, nothing to offer but a pretty face? Each word struck like a precise blade, finding the doubts Victoria had planted the night before. You don't know anything about us, Nadine said, though her voice lacked conviction. I know Lucian, Victoria insisted. I know he dated socialites and heiresses before me. Women from the right families with the right backgrounds, the right connections. Women who fit his world. She gestured dismissively at Nadine. You're beautiful, I'll grant you that. But beauty fades, and when it does, what will you have left that he values? The question hung in the air, painful in its precision. Take the money, Victoria urged. Go home to Savannah, to your grandmother, your real life, before you get hurt worse than you already will be. Nadine stood, leaving the envelope untouched. Thank you for lunch, Victoria, but I think we're done here. Victoria remained seated, confident. Think about it. The offer stands for 48 hours. After that, she shrugged elegantly. Well, the board meeting is on Monday. Things might get very unpleasant for everyone. Outside in the waiting car, Nadine struggled to maintain her composure. Victoria's words had found every insecurity, every doubt she harbored about her relationship with Lucian, about her place in his world. He was ashamed of you, until he saw your face. The women he dated before me, what they all had in common. What will you have left that he values? By the time she reached the penthouse, Nadine had made a decision. She couldn't continue like this, caught between growing feelings for Lucian and deepening doubts about his feelings for her. She needed truth, no matter how painful. Lucian was waiting in the living room, tension evident in every line of his body. What happened? He demanded as soon as she entered. What did she say to you? She offered me money, Nadine said flatly, to tell the truth about our arrangement. Anger flashed across his face. That's low, even for her. How much? $1 million, Nadine said. But that's not what I want to talk about. She moved to the window, gathering her courage. When she turned back to face him, her eyes were steady, determined. Victoria said something last night. About the women you dated before her. About what they all had in common. Lucian's expression closed. Victoria says a lot of things, most of them designed to hurt. But was this true? Nadine pressed. The women you chose, were they all from certain backgrounds? Certain families? He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Yes, I dated women from similar circles, business connections, family friends, the right schools. Women who belonged in your world, Nadine said softly. Not women like me. Nadine, she also said you were ashamed of me, Nadine continued, the words painful to speak, until you saw my face, that you looked disgusted at our wedding. Before I removed the veil, Lucian flinched as if struck. Victoria wasn't even at the wedding, but she wasn't wrong, was she? Nadine challenged. I saw your face that day, Lucian, the disdain, the reluctance. You couldn't even look at me until after the veil was lifted. And then, suddenly, everything changed. It wasn't like that, Lucian began, but Nadine cut him off. Wasn't it? You've never denied your initial assumptions about me, about what kind of woman would agree to this arrangement. Her voice shook slightly. And then you saw my face and suddenly I was acceptable. Suddenly you could tolerate the contract you'd signed. Lucian stepped toward her, but she backed away. I need to know the truth, she insisted. What changed for you? Was it just my appearance? Did I suddenly have value because I was pretty enough to be seen on your arm? Pain and guilt warred in Lucian's expression. It wasn't that simple. Then explain it to me, Nadine demanded, because right now I don't know what's real anymore. This arrangement, these feelings, any of it. Lucian ran a hand through his hair, his composure finally cracking. Yes, I had assumptions, he admitted. Yes, I was cold at the wedding. I resented the entire situation, being forced to marry a stranger to secure what was rightfully mine. And when you lifted the veil, when you saw what was under it, I was surprised, he acknowledged. I'd expected, Someone beneath you, Nadine finished for him, echoing her words from their wedding day. Someone you could barely tolerate for a year and then discard. Yes, Lucian said, the brutal honesty surprising them both. That's what I expected. That's what I prepared myself for. The confirmation hurt more than Nadine had anticipated. Even knowing it, hearing it spoken aloud cut deep. But that's not what happened, Lucian continued, his voice softening. Yes, I noticed your beauty. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But what changed everything, what's continued to change everything, is who you are, Nadine. He moved closer, and this time she didn't back away. Your dignity that day, standing up to me. Your independence, finding purpose at the literacy center instead of shopping or lunching like the women I used to date. Your kindness to Mrs. Hayes. Your compassion when I told you about my mother. His eyes held hers, more open than she'd ever seen them. That's what changed for me. Not just your face, you, the person I've been discovering day by day. Nadine wanted to believe him, wanted it with an intensity that frightened her, but doubt still lingered. And if I wasn't beautiful, she asked quietly, if you'd lifted that veil and found someone plain, would you have discovered all those other qualities? The question hung between them, impossible to answer honestly. Lucian's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, Nadine whispered, pain evident in her voice. She moved past him toward her room, needing space, needing to think. Nadine, wait, Lucian called after her. Where are you going? She paused but didn't turn. I need time to figure out what's real and what isn't, for both of us. As her door closed behind her, Lucian stood alone in the living room, the distance between them suddenly greater than the few feet of hallway that separated their doors. The weekend passed in a haze of careful avoidance. Nadine and Lucian moved around each other like wary dancers, sharing spaces, but never truly connecting. The warmth that had begun to grow between them at the beach house had frozen over, replaced by polite distance and unspoken pain. On Sunday evening, Nadine sat alone on the terrace, wrapped in a blanket against the November chill. The city lights spread before her like fallen stars, beautiful but distant, much like her relationship with Lucian. Victoria's words still echoed in her mind, but now they mingled with Lucian's desperate explanation, his admission of initial prejudice, his insistence that he had come to value her for more than her appearance. Was it true, or just another performance? This one designed to keep her in the arrangement until he secured his inheritance. The door slid open behind her, and Lucian stepped out. He'd respected her need for space these past 2 days, keeping his distance despite the board meeting looming tomorrow. May I join you? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Nadine nodded, and he took the chair beside her, both of them looking out at the city rather than at each other. The board meeting is tomorrow, Lucian said after a moment. Victoria will present her takeover offer. I know. Your presence would help, he admitted, but I understand if you don't want to be there. Nadine finally turned to look at him. In the dim light of the terrace, his face seemed more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. What happens if you lose? She asked. I lose control of the company my grandfather built, the one my father expanded. He met her gaze. And likely the inheritance as well, if Victoria can convince the trustees our marriage isn't genuine. And if that happens, what becomes of our arrangement? Lucian hesitated. The contract would be void. You'd be free to leave, though your grandmother's land would still be secure. I made sure of that. The revelation surprised her. You did? Last week. He nodded. I had my lawyer set up a separate trust for the Clark property. Regardless of what happens with the company or the inheritance, your family's land is protected. Why would you do that? Something shifted in Lucian's expression. A softening, a surrender. Because I couldn't bear the thought of you staying in a marriage you didn't want just to protect your grandmother, because your happiness matters to me, because... He took a deep breath. Because somewhere along the way this stopped being just an arrangement for me too. The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and profound. I don't know what to believe anymore, Nadine admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. What's real and what's performance? Then let me show you, Lucian said, reaching for her hand. Come with me. Curious despite her reservations, Nadine allowed him to lead her inside through the penthouse to his home office, the one room she had never entered. He unlocked the door and ushered her in. Unlike the minimalist modernity of the rest of the penthouse, this room was warm, almost intimate. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled not just with business volumes but classics, history, philosophy. A large desk dominated one side of the room, but it was the easel in the corner that caught Nadine's attention. "Use still drawer," she said softly, moving toward it. On the easel was a detailed architectural sketch, a house with wide porches and tall windows nestled among oak trees. It looked strangely familiar. "Is that your grandmother's house in Savannah?" Lucian confirmed. "Or at least, my interpretation of it, based on the photos in your room." Nadine stared at the drawing, taking in the careful details. The porch swing where she'd spent countless afternoons reading, the rose garden Eleanor had tended for decades, the ancient oak that had sheltered generations of Clarks. "When did you draw this?" "I started it after our trip to Cape Cod," Lucian admitted, "when you told me about growing up there." Beside the easel was a portfolio. With Lucian's nod of permission, Nadine opened it to find more sketches, the beach house, the Boston skyline, and several of herself, reading in the living room, standing at the window, smiling at the art festival. "You've been drawing me," she said, not a question. "Yes. No excuses, no explanations, just simple truth." Nadine studied the sketches, noting the care in each line, the attention to small details, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, the slight furrow between her brows when she was thinking deeply. "These aren't just about how I look," she realized aloud. "No," Lucian agreed softly. "They're about who you are, the person I've been falling in love with, day by day, against all my expectations." The word hung in the air. Love. Unexpected, unplanned, perhaps unwanted, but there nonetheless. "I can't promise I'm perfect, Nadine," Lucian continued when she remained silent. "I can't erase my initial prejudice or the man I was when we married, but I can promise that the man standing before you now sees you, truly sees you, for everything you are, and wants you to stay, not for any arrangement or inheritance, but simply because the thought of losing you is unbearable." Nadine felt tears welling in her eyes, overwhelmed by the evidence before her. These drawings weren't performance. They weren't for show. They were private expressions of growing feeling hidden away in this sanctuary. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything now," Lucian assured her. "Just be there tomorrow. Help me fight for the company. And after whatever happens, we can figure out what comes next. Together." He reached out, gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The touch was tender, reverent almost. "Will you stand with me tomorrow?" he asked, hope and fear mingling in his voice. Looking into his eyes, Nadine found her answer. "Yes, I'll be there." The Albrecht Industries boardroom hummed with tension. 20 board members sat around the massive table, with Lucian at the head and Nadine beside him. Victoria and Harold Green sat opposite, confidence radiating from them both. Richard Montgomery, as chairman of the board, called the meeting to order. "Today we will hear a proposal from Pinnacle Investments, represented by Victoria Sanderson and Harold Green, regarding a potential acquisition of Albrecht Industries." Following their presentation, Lucian Albrecht will have the opportunity to respond before the board begins deliberations. Victoria rose, sleek and poised in a charcoal suit. Her presentation was masterful, charts showing potential growth under Pinnacle's management, promises of increased shareholder value, subtle hints about the instability of current leadership. "With Gerald Albrecht's passing," she concluded smoothly, "the company faces unprecedented uncertainty. Questions around the inheritance, the unusual circumstances of Lucian's sudden marriage, the potential for legal challenges, all create vulnerability in the market." Her eyes flicked to Nadine, a subtle challenge. "Pinnacle offers stability, clear leadership, a path forward without the complications of family dynamics and hastily arranged unions." The implication was clear, and Nadine felt several board members glance their way. Victoria's strategy was working, planting seeds of doubt about their marriage, about Lucian's right to lead. When Victoria finished, Harold Green added his own endorsement, lending the weight of his reputation to the offer. By the time they sat down, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Board members leaned toward each other, whispering considerations. Then it was Lucian's turn. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket, the picture of corporate confidence. But as he moved toward the presentation screen, he paused, his hand brushing Nadine's shoulder, a gesture both seeking and offering strength. "Victoria has presented you with numbers," Lucian began. "Projections, promises of growth and profit, all valuable considerations for any board." He clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared. Not a chart or graph, but a photograph of Lucian's grandfather breaking ground on the first Albrecht factory in 1952. But Albrecht Industries has never been just about numbers, he continued. It's been about people, about vision, about creating something that lasts beyond quarterly reports. As he spoke, Nadine watched the board members' reactions. Some remained skeptical, others leaned forward with interest. Victoria's expression grew increasingly frustrated as Lucian systematically dismantled her offer, presenting not just counter-projections, but a vision for the company's future that honored its past while embracing innovation. My grandfather built this company with the belief that business could improve lives, Lucian said. My father expanded it with an eye toward legacy. And I stand before you today not just as their heir, but as someone who has found new purpose in continuing that vision. His eyes met Nadine's briefly, a private acknowledgement of how she had changed him. Victoria suggested that my marriage brings instability to the company. Lucian addressed the elephant in the room directly, that it was hastily arranged and somehow undermines my leadership. He moved back to stand beside Nadine, his hand finding hers. What she fails to mention is how my wife has helped me see beyond profit margins to the human impact of our decisions, how her background in education has informed our new community initiatives, how her presence in my life has made me not just a better man, but a better leader. Victoria's face had paled, her strategy backfiring as Lucian transformed what she had framed as a weakness into strength. I won't pretend our marriage began conventionally, Lucian continued, honesty in every word. My father's will had specific requirements that I initially resented, but what started as obligation has become the greatest blessing of my life. He squeezed Nadine's hand, and she returned the pressure, their eyes meeting in a moment of perfect understanding. I love my wife, Lucian said simply, the words meant for Nadine as much as the board. And I love this company. I'm asking you to trust me to lead both with integrity and vision. As he finished his presentation, the room fell silent. Richard Montgomery cleared his throat, visibly moved. Before we proceed to a vote, Richard said, I feel I should share something with the board, something Gerald Albrecht confided in me before his death. All eyes turned to the older man, surprise rippling through the room. Gerald knew his son well, Richard began. Knew his strengths as a businessman, but also recognized his blind spots when it came to personal connection. The marriage requirement in his will wasn't capricious or controlling. It was a father's final attempt to give his son what had brought Gerald himself the greatest joy in life, a true partnership. Richard looked directly at Lucian. Your father researched dozens of potential matches. He wasn't looking for social connections or business advantages. He was looking for someone with strength of character, someone who would challenge you, balance you, someone who would see past the Albrecht name and fortune to the man beneath. His gaze shifted to Nadine. He found that person in Nadine Clark, a woman who had faced hardship with dignity, who had dedicated herself to education rather than personal gain, who had the kind of quiet strength that reminded him of your mother. Lucian stared at Richard, stunned. My father chose Nadine specifically, not just any arrangement. He did, Richard confirmed. He believed she was exactly who you needed, though he knew you'd never have found her on your own. Your worlds were too separate, your own biases too entrenched. Victoria stood abruptly. This is absurd. You expect us to believe this fairy tale? That Gerald Albrecht was playing matchmaker from his deathbed? I have his letters, Richard replied calmly. His notes on each candidate, his final instructions. He removed an envelope from his jacket. I was to share this only if necessary. If the marriage was threatened or questioned, it seems that time has come. He handed the envelope to Lucian, who opened it with shaking hands. Inside were pages of his father's distinctive handwriting, notes, observations, and finally, a letter addressed to Lucian himself. As Lucian read silently, his expression transformed from shock to understanding to something like gratitude. When he finished, he passed the letter to Nadine. My son, if you're reading this, then you've married Nadine Clark as required, but something has threatened the union I so carefully arranged. Perhaps your own stubborn pride, perhaps outside forces, perhaps the vast differences in your backgrounds that initially made me certain she was the right choice. Yes, the right choice. Not a random selection or a cruel manipulation, but a father's final gift to his son. You see, I recognized in you the same coldness that nearly destroyed me after your mother's illness. The walls you built, the way you judge value by wealth and status rather than character. Nadine Clark is everything you need and nothing you would have chosen for yourself. Her strength is quiet but unbreakable. Her intelligence is practical rather than academic. Her beauty, which I'm sure you've noticed, is merely the wrapping on a character of rare quality. I chose her for you because she reminds me of your mother before illness stole her away, because she has faced loss without becoming bitter, because she values loyalty above advantage. Most importantly, I chose her because she will never be impressed by your money or your name. If you win her heart, it will be because you've become the man I always knew you could be, one worthy of such a woman. This marriage may have begun as a requirement, but my deepest hope is that it becomes a choice. That you discover, as I did with your mother, that true partnership is life's greatest treasure. With love and hope, your father Nadine looked up from the letter, tears in her eyes, to find Lucien watching her with an expression of wonder and realization. He knew, Lucien whispered. Somehow he knew exactly what I needed. Victoria, sensing the shifting tide, made one last desperate attempt. This is clearly a forgery. Convenient timing, Richard. Producing this letter just when Lucien needs board support. The handwriting can be verified, Richard replied calmly, as can the paper and ink. But more telling is the fact that Nadine has indeed proven to be exactly what Gerald described, a woman of character who has changed Lucien for the better. Anyone who has seen them together these past months can attest to that. Murmurs of agreement circled the table. Board members who had known Gerald for decades nodded, recognition in their eyes. I believe we're ready to vote, Richard announced. The proposal before us is whether to accept Pinnacle Investments' offer to acquire Albrecht Industries. One by one, the board members voted. As the tally mounted, Victoria's face grew increasingly rigid. The final count was decisive, 17 against the acquisition, 3 in favor. The board has spoken, Richard declared. Albrecht Industries remains under current leadership. Victoria stood, gathering her papers with barely controlled fury. This isn't over, Lucien. Actually, Victoria, it is, Lucien replied calmly. You played your hand. You lost. Now it's time to move on, as I did after our relationship ended. Harold Green, seeing the clear defeat, was already heading for the door, his interest in Victoria's vendetta clearly waning with the failed takeover. After they left, and the board members began to disperse, Richard approached Lucien and Nadine. I should have shown you the letter sooner, he admitted. But Gerald was explicit. It was to be shared only if necessary, only if the marriage was truly threatened. Thank you, Lucien said, shaking the older man's hand, for this and for everything you've done to honor my father's wishes. Richard smiled at them both. Gerald would be pleased, not just with the outcome of the vote, but with what he's seeing between you two. It's what he hoped for all along. When they were finally alone in the boardroom, Lucien turned to Nadine, taking both her hands in his. I don't know what to say, he began. All this time I thought my father was punishing me, controlling me from the grave, but he was giving me the greatest gift of my life. Me? Nadine asked, a small smile playing at her lips. You, Lucien confirmed, though I doubt even he realized just how perfect his choice would be. His hands tightened on hers. I meant what I said to the board, Nadine. I love you, not because of my father's arrangements or the inheritance or any contract. I love you because you've shown me a different way to see the world, because you challenge me and ground me at the same time. Nadine's heart swelled with emotions too complex to name. Victoria was right about one thing, she said softly. You were ashamed of me at first. You did judge me before you knew me. Yes, Lucien admitted, no longer hiding from the truth, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But she was wrong about everything else, Nadine continued, because you changed. You saw past your initial prejudice. You let me in little by little. She reached up to touch his face, the gesture tender and new. And somewhere along the way, I started falling in love with you too. Not the CEO or the heir, but the man who makes breakfast and draws buildings and talks about his mother with such love. Lucien's eyes lit with hope. So where does that leave us? Our arrangement? I think, Nadine said carefully, that it's time for a new arrangement, one based on choice rather than obligation. What kind of arrangement did you have in mind? Lucien asked, moving closer. One where I stay not because of any contract, but because I want to. Because we're building something real together. Lucien's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. I think I can agree to those terms. As he leaned down to kiss her, a real kiss, their first that wasn't for show or ceremony, Nadine knew they were stepping into something neither had anticipated when they'd stood before that altar months ago. Something genuine, something lasting, something that had begun when he lifted the veil and saw not just her face, but the possibility of a life transformed. 1 year later, The Clark family home in Savannah glowed with warm light against the dusk. On the wide front porch, Eleanor sat in her rocking chair, watching her granddaughter and grandson-in-law stroll through the garden hand in hand. "You were right about those roses," Lucian was saying, admiring the bloom Eleanor had grafted last spring. "They're spectacular." "Grandma has always had a gift with growing things," Nadine replied. "People too, she knew you had potential." Lucian laughed, the sound easy and natural. "Even when I was at my most insufferable?" "Especially then," Nadine smiled, squeezing his hand. They had come to Savannah for the anniversary of their wedding, not the cold ceremony of a year ago, but the second wedding they'd had 6 months later. A real wedding, with Nadine in a new dress and no veil, and Lucian waiting at the altar with love rather than resentment in his eyes. The board had recognized their marriage as genuine long before that, releasing the full inheritance. Victoria had left Boston for London, her ambitions redirected elsewhere, and Lucian had kept his promise to honor his father's legacy, both at Albrecht Industries and in his personal life. As they reached the old oak tree at the edge of the property, Lucian stopped, turning to face his wife. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "A small token for our anniversary." He withdrew a small velvet box. Inside was not jewelry as Nadine had expected, but a key. "What's this?" she asked, puzzled. "The key to our new home," Lucian explained. "Or rather, our second home, for whenever we want to escape Boston." Nadine's eyes widened. "You bought a house in Savannah?" "Better," Lucian smiled. "I bought the land adjacent to your grandmother's property, and I'm building us a house there, based on the sketches I've been working on, so you can be close to her, to your roots." Tears welled in Nadine's eyes. "You're building me a home?" "I'm building us a home," Lucian corrected gently, "because I've learned that home isn't about location or luxury. It's about belonging, about choice, about the people you love." He cupped her face in his hands, still marveling at how this woman, once a stranger, once an obligation, had become the center of his world. "You once asked me what changed when I lifted your veil," he said softly. "The truth is, everything changed. Not just because of what I saw, but because of what I began to see in myself through your eyes. The man I could become, the life we could build." Nadine leaned into his touch, overwhelmed by how far they had come. From strangers bound by contract to partners bound by choice. "When do we break ground?" she asked, excitement building. "Tomorrow," Lucian revealed. "If you approve the final plans, of course." "Let me guess," Nadine teased. "It has a wraparound porch and a library and lots of room for Eleanor to visit." "And a classroom," Lucian added, "for when you decide you're ready to teach again, and a studio for my drawings, and—" he hesitated, suddenly nervous. "A nursery for someday, if you want." Nadine's heart swelled with joy and possibility. "I want," she whispered, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "I definitely want." From the porch, Eleanor watched them with satisfaction. When Lucian had first arrived in Savannah with that lawyer and that contract, she had taken one look at him and seen past the cold exterior to the wounded soul beneath, had recognized in him the potential for growth, for love, just as Gerald Albrecht had seen in Nadine the perfect partner for his son. Two fathers reaching across time and circumstance to give their children the greatest gift, the chance to build something real together, something that had begun with obligation but had blossomed into choice. As twilight deepened into evening, Nadine and Lucian returned to the porch, their future stretching before them like an open road, no longer veiled but clear and bright with promise. On what would have been the day she leaves for good, Nadine finds a box in their bedroom. Inside is a second veil, her own, carefully preserved, and a note. "If I could marry you again, with eyes wide open, heart ready, I'd do it every day for the rest of my life. Lift the veil again. This time let me be the one who waits." She turns, and Lucian is on one knee holding nothing but truth in his eyes. "Tui quandi."